Cool. Okay. Um, so, hi, this is Joe Makuc here with the PHS Cultivating Community Garden Histories Project. Today's date is October 5th, 2021, and I am here on Zoom for a conversation with Bob Jobin about the history of Bouvier, also known as Bouvier to some residents of Philadelphia, Community Garden on the 1300 block of South Bouvier Street. So let's jump in quickly with a basic warm-up question. So Bob, you note that you grew up in Denver, Colorado. So did you or your neighbors have gardens there?
Yeah, hi Joe. Good to be here today. We did. I grew up on a street in Denver that had yards and things, so it wasn't the row houses you find in this section of South Philly. And my dad was a big gardener, so I would grow up watching him in the backyard because he was more ornamental garden. So he would be watering constantly because he's from New Jersey, so he likes a very lush landscape. And in Denver, we don't have quite the amount of rain that they have in New Jersey, so he was constantly watering. So those are my first memories of him from doing that.
Great. So then I want to ask, who taught you how to garden, kind of tying into that question?
Yeah, I would say my dad was the primary person that taught me how to garden growing up in Colorado, but I didn't really start gardening myself until after college. And I'd been in Philadelphia. My wife was working at PHS. I did the tree tenders program there. I said, this is pretty neat. And then I jumped in and joined the Master Gardener program, Penn State Extension, Philadelphia County. And then from there, jumped into the community garden scene.
Okay. And so then how did you come to Bouvier Community Garden specifically?
Yeah, so my wife had lived in this section of South Philadelphia probably since 2008. We moved in to the same property a little north of Washington Avenue on 15th Street for a few years in the 2009 to 2012 period of time. And then in 2013, we bought a house on South Carlisle Street down here at 15th and Federal or so abouts. So Bouvier is the closest community garden to that. So I looked them up. I contacted them in 2013 when we moved, was put on the wait list for a year, and then joined the garden in spring 2014.
Okay. And so next, I want to ask, what roles have you played in Bouvier since then?
So I started out as a gardener, just a basic member gardener, plot holder in summer of 2014, and then in spring 2015, I transitioned to the co-coordinator, is what we call the garden leaders. So myself and my neighbor Amanda Tursky were volunteered to be the co-coordinators, and we've been the co-coordinators since that time, since spring 2015.
All right. And so then I think that also I wanted to ask you a little bit more about like the general relationship between NGT, given that, you know, you're now on the board, and also that you've in previous conversation mentioned, you know, the changing role of NGT relative to kind of this change in garden leadership and garden plans that occurred around 2014, 2016. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Bouvier has been protected as a garden by the then Neighborhood Gardens Association, now NGT, since 1994, as I understand it. And at that time, it was a group of local residents gardening the garden. They got older. I've seen paperwork that says they were in their 80s in 2009 about. So about 2009, the garden hadn't been actively gardened and was being restarted in conjunction with the Newbold Neighbors Association. And then NGA was helping them sort of like get things going again. So let's see. So I guess with support from the Neighborhood Gardens Association, this is my understanding, they worked as the neighborhood group. I'm sorry, I sort of lost that question for a second there, Joe.
Yeah, I was just asking about like the, you mentioned the 2014 and 2016 years are really formative, particularly with regard to, you know, the relationship between NGA/NGT now and the garden. So if you could kind of talk through like kind of the redevelopment of the relationship with NGT.
Sure. Yeah, so the garden gets restarted in 2009, 2010 with the Newbold Neighbors Association. At that time, the 1300 block of South Bouvier had a lot of vacant land on it. It was probably like half vacant, so that the garden sits with maybe 4 plots towards Reed Street, and then 8 lots towards Gordon Street that at the time were vacant lots. So like just like bare ground lots. And then across the street, there had been another like 12 or 13 vacant lots. These lots were owned by the city. They were owned by private parties. Some were, you know, up to date on taxes. Some were delinquent on taxes. So it was a really like mixed group of properties in South Philadelphia that you often found in the Point Breeze neighborhood at that time, in this early 2010s sort of time in the neighborhood's history. So the city lots, there was a plan, conversations that I've been told about that happened between Newbold Neighbors Association, the gardeners at the time, NGA, and Councilwoman Berna's office to try to protect some of those city lots into the garden so that there'd be like maybe a sitting garden that would be with the vegetable garden. And just to preserve more of this green space in Point Breeze, in this neighborhood on this block of Bouvier Street. So, but this is again around the same time that Councilwoman Burns retiring, and NGA is transitioning to NGT. There's leadership transition there, organizational transition there. The Newbold Neighborhood Association has only been founded a few years earlier. They're transitioning as well. They've got new people that continually come into leadership positions. So the plan to protect more of these lots in association with the garden has never followed through. So I come 2014, spring 2015. At that time, Councilman Johnson's in office, second council here in Philadelphia. NGA has been reestablished as NGT with Jenny Greenberg as the executive director there. And the Newbold Neighborhood Association's relationship to Bouvier Garden isn't as strong as it once was. There's less members of the neighborhood association in the garden, maybe only 1 or 2 left. And as the neighborhood association had been sort of acting as a fiscal agent, administrative sponsor of the garden at that time, that sort of relationship between the neighborhood association and the garden isn't as like clear and doesn't make as much sense possibly going forward. So that's the situation we're at in 2014, early 2015. At the same time, the city-owned lots that were near the garden, covering the garden, are sold to a developer through Councilman Johnson's office with a plan to build, I think, 13 buildings, 13 like 2-story buildings and 3-story houses on the lots across the street from the garden and adjacent to the garden. In these conversations, I was told that the councilman's office wanted to make sure like the garden was taken care of, like it wasn't like displaced or it wasn't like, you know, done a hardship by this construction that was going to take place on the block, but that also, you know, there wasn't going to be more land that was going to be added to the garden. I say that wasn't entirely. So what happened is that Bouvier Garden was on parts of 4 lots, but we only owned NGA, NGT only owned 2 of those lots. So on both of our southern border and our northern border, we were overextended the lot lines that we owned. The southern border, the lot lines that we were overextended on contained our water line and our shed. So they were kind of important parts of the garden. And we had a large, you know, wrought iron fence around the whole property, which that NGA had put in around 2010 or so. So the developer at the time, 2015, came to the garden and said, like, look, you guys are like on the lots that we're going to build these houses on. So what we're going to do is we're going to help shift you guys over. So we're going to, because the one lot is big enough to build a house, we're going to put a house on the southern area of the garden. The northern lot was actually not big enough to have a property. It was only 9 feet frontage on the street, which in Philadelphia is a very small lot. So he was actually going to donate that lot to the garden and move our fence line for us, so that the garden would sit on 3 lots. We'd be fully owned, those 3 lots in NGT. We'd have a fence surrounding that portion of the garden, and he would move our water line and our shed for us. So this was like, it was going to be a hard thing because we'd have to like move the garden and do construction in the garden, but we weren't going to like lose the garden. We weren't going to like lose the shed and the water line. So it was a good thing for us to like have like this developer that was willing to like work with the garden to get these things taken care of. So I'll pause there if you have any questions, but I could keep on like telling this story because there's different there's different pieces that kind of weave in and out for the next couple of years here.
I just wanted to quickly clarify, this is happening, so the developer's offer is coming in around like 2015?
Spring 2015. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll let you keep going. I might have some questions later based on what I've read about, the garden.
Right. So spring 2015, we get this developer offer. The developer they need some zoning approvals for some of the houses they want to build. And the zoning RCO is the New Build Neighborhood Association. So it's a group that like founded the garden, like likes the garden. They need to like give these approvals. So there's a process where the developer has to go and present in front of the zoning committee of New Build Neighbors. He does that in spring 2015. New Build Neighbors says like, we'll give our vote to support the project if you like come up with a legal agreement with the garden, so that you have like the garden can't be like taken out through this process. They need some sort of like legal framework that they can rely on, and that we can help you be in touch with the parties you need to be in touch with to get that done. So that's the time that NGT comes in. That's the time I start working with Jenny Greenberg over at NGT and their lawyers on their board to come up with a legal agreement for the garden with the developer, between the developer and NGT, that lays out certain conditions that during the course of the construction, the developer would do the things he told us he would do before he started. And that if things weren't done the right way, or if there was issues that arose through that process, that the garden would be have this legal agreement that would protect its infrastructure, its pieces through that process. So at that time, like I'm co-leader, just starting as co-leader in the garden. I'd only been there for a year. I'm kind of like amazed at the role that NGT played there, because like I could put myself in the shoes of another gardener that wasn't on NGT land and was like having like a developer come in and try to like build properties right next to their garden, and you just realize like as a garden how vulnerable you are to that, but also like how without resources and legal guidance you are if you don't have an organization like NGT in the mix to guide you through the process, and to really like provide an organizational backstop for this type of threat that is posed to gardens by building. Because this was like legal, but like there was nothing like wrong. There was nothing bad here. It was just like a standard kind of thing you had to go through to have something built next to a garden. And we were very lucky to be on NGT land and have NGT to help us through this process. So that's kind of what led me to joining the board, because I saw how important NGT was to this process of Bouvier. And like I'd said, like if NGT wasn't there, like they weren't there to provide guidance and support on the other side of it too, the rebuilding of the garden, like Bouvier garden would not be there. And like on the block itself, all the vacant land at that time, 2014, now has houses on it. There's no vacant land left on. There's hardly there's from 50 lots of vacant land on Bouvier Street, there's now maybe 4 left. So there's probably been over 30, 40 houses built on that 1,300 block of South Bouvier in the last 5 years. So you see that like a garden like Bouvier doesn't exist on this lot without the protection of neighborhood gardens trust, without a land trust that holds the garden, and without the like administrative support to see us through development on the block, because it's it's been a process. And I can talk through some of the things that happened like as the garden went under construction, if you want, as a next step.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we came to this agreement in the spring of 2015 with the developer, with NGT. So we felt good that like we were going to like have a garden on the other side of this. And the developer was sensitive to the fact that like construction, if possible, shouldn't happen during the growing season. Like we should have like, a growing season, or we could have most of the growing season, that there'd be minimal impacts to the garden around like the seasonality of gardening. So the whole summer of 2015, we were fine. We didn't have any work on the block. We just had a normal growing season after this. 2016, he started building houses across the street, but he didn't go near the garden yet. He didn't start the construction on the garden. So we actually had 2016 as a full season too. And then fall 2016, he said he's going to start construction in November, December or so. So we prepare the garden to be closed at the end of 2016, the end of the growing season there. It's been since 2009, 2010, when they rebuilt everything, 7 or 8 years. So the garden's like, the infrastructure in the garden is kind of like, the beds are crumbling. They didn't really like do much more infrastructure when they rebuilt it. They just sort of cleared land and put in raised beds. Like they had a shed placed in the back corner, but it was just kind of like, hanging out in the back. It wasn't really like on a pad or anything like that. So I think like the thought process was we would rebuild the whole garden after construction passed. So we pretty much made plans to just scrape down the garden fall of 2016. So we said, to the gardeners, take what you want. Like it's going to be a rebuild that we're going to go through. And even though like maybe only like 6 feet of the property were affected by the construction, we just said like, let's just rebuild the whole thing. PHS had a grant that was providing support. NGT was going to provide support to rebuild. So we made the decision to just like take down the whole garden in fall 2016. So construction happens, goes through a process. It's looking like maybe June 2017, like we finally kind of have the site back. So probably about 8 months of like not being on the site, 6 to 8 months of not being on the site. At that time, the developer has built a new concrete pad for the shed. So they've moved our shed onto a new concrete pad. They've put in a new water line. Eileen Gallagher with the PHS Gardens team at that time comes in with a crew from a local landscaping company, and they rebuild 21 beds in the garden. They bring in clean soil. I guess I'll say during this time, during the previous 12 months, there was a group of gardeners at Bouvier Community Garden that came up with a new plan for the garden. So we had like a little committee that did like some drawings and did some designs. And what we ended up with like wasn't too dissimilar from how the garden looked initially. It was pretty much just like a raised bed garden with narrow pathways. And then because this new house was going to be on the south side of the garden, it was only a 2-story house, but it would still like create like a little shade zone there. So along like towards that shade zone, we built like a 6-foot out patio, we had the plan to have a six by maybe 15 patio along that side, and then also to have like a shade garden, communal shade garden bed on that side of the house. So we rebuilt the vegetable beds towards the northern part of the garden, because that would allow as much sun as possible to come in over this house on the south side. So we did 21 beds, pretty tight beds, built by Eileen and her team in June 2017. So probably by July 2017, like we said, gardeners could come back and plant. Philadelphia, July, it's not the best time to plant. So we had like some people that were able to like throw in some tomatoes and like get their, get a few crops in. Some people did some fall crops. But the 2017 growing season wasn't a huge like growing season. People just kind of like eased back in. And I don't think we even like said like you had to, I don't know if we even collected dues that year, honestly. And just said like this is just a wash of the season. If you like wanted to do anything with us, you could, but it wasn't like an intense garden year that year, 2017. So, but at the end of the day, like we felt like the garden was at least like back on a trajectory. And this whole thing, like being taken down and then being put back up in like 12 months, like seemed like it was a process that we were involved in. It was going forward, and it felt like slow and long, but in the scheme of how I know gardens operate now, and like how hard it is to like get these things built back again, like it was kind of amazing that it happened so quickly. And that's a credit to the developer. It's also a credit to like PHS and NGT that they really did like make this a priority to like get this garden back again, and it happened really quick. Looking back on it now, it could have gone a lot wrong in a lot of different ways, and thankfully it didn't. So 2018 is like the first season where we feel like we can really like get back and have a full year planned out of there. There's still like the side of the garden alongside the house to the south that needs to have some work done. We wanted to get a patio installed. We wanted to put the shade bed in June 2018, Eileen Gallagher and the PHS team are able to install this new patio. So we have the new brick patio laid that sort of walks into our shed, and then we planted out this shade bed in front of the patio towards Bouvier Street. So all that infrastructure on that side of the garden is fully complete now at that point in time. This is mid 2018 summer, so June 2018. So we can really like put all our plants in and have everything going. People have been growing in their beds and stuff at that point in time. And then the last phase of this work that gets done happens in spring 2019 when we install a mosaic sign that had been created by one of the very original gardeners in the garden way back in 2011, 2012. She had made it but wasn't able to install it due to the construction, has since left the garden, but like still has this sign that like she wants to donate to the garden and have installed. So in spring 2019 we install this mosaic sign, which we can provide pictures of, but Joe may be able to see as well in the garden. And then we really like feel like it's fully rebuilt. Like I felt at that point in time the garden was fully back. So that was a 4-year process from the start of this like developer saying like, hey, I'm gonna do this in spring 2015 to spring 2019 when we can get this sign. So it takes like, as a garden leader, like to stick with it for 4 years to like know this is happening. That's not something that like every garden can do. So it takes like, the people on the ground doing the work to make sure that this process goes through, and luckily it did at Bouvier. And then at the conclusion of the 2019 growing season, we won a PHS Blue Ribbon. So we in the PHS gardening contest. So it really felt like, the rebuild, the renovation was successful. We've won the garden contest, or we've got the Blue Ribbon in the garden contest. And then since 2019, the gardens continue to sort of just have a more stable group of gardeners. It doesn't turn over as much. We probably had maybe like six to seven plots turn over every year in that period. So about 25-30% of the garden would turn over every year, new gardeners. That just this last season coming in, growing in the 2021 season, we only had 2 plots turn over. So you can see like the gardener group is getting more stable, and the garden itself, like our maintenance processes and sort of like what we do in the garden is pretty stable as well.
Cool. Wow. Okay. That was really informative and comprehensive at like covering the entire gap from 2016 to 2021. So thank you very much for that. For the purposes of anyone listening, I just want to quickly to this in the, in posterity, I just want to quickly describe the mosaic. So from what I can see, there's a lot, like it's a, nice rectangle with, a lot of colors particularly green and blue, with Bouvier Community Garden in the center, surrounded by like an array of carrots, tomatoes, eggplants, I think, and a little bit of grass at the bottom, I think. Yeah, it is really cool. I'm glad that they, chose to donate it. And yeah, I wanted to quickly backtrack a little bit though, back to 2016, specifically October 25th, 2016. Because one of the first things that came up when I searched your name in Bouvier Community Garden was your testimony before the Water Rate Board then, about, I think it was a stormwater exemption. Could you talk a little bit more about that process and about,
Sure.
yeah.
So, when I joined the board of NGT, and I think I joined in maybe, it was either, depending on when you joined the board, it was either December 2015 or January 2016, in that period. One of the pressing issues that we'd seen in gardens across the city was water, like either dealing with the water department, like, or having water bills and how to deal with those. And at the same time, the water department's doing these stormwater charges on properties in Philadelphia, which means that if you have a water bill, you have to pay a certain percentage of the land towards a stormwater charge. And this is mainly because buildings, run off water into the sewers. Philadelphia has a combined sewer, so in heavy rain events, that water runs into the river. And it's contaminated water. It's not nothing you want in a river. So that in order to mitigate stormwater effects in the city, that the water department is thinking through both gray and green infrastructure to mitigate stormwater effects. And part of green infrastructure is planting rain gardens on particularly flood-prone land in the city. And the idea of this rain garden is that it captures water for a period of time after a heavy rain event, and then will slowly release it back into the sewers, such that they don't, have an overflow combined sewer event that would happen. That the more rain gardens you have, the slower water getting to the sewers would be, in theory. And it's actually much cheaper to plant a garden than it is to put in a new concrete sewer. So the water department sees this as a benefit to be able to put these rain gardens in around the city. But at the same time, on water bills and garden water accounts, they were charging gardens a stormwater fee. So the same thing that they're charging like a parking lot or a brick concrete row house with a flat roof, they're charging a garden, when in effect a garden is acting as this same thing as the stormwater. It's capturing stormwater, slowly releasing it. So it made sense to us to petition the water board to exempt gardens from this stormwater charge. And that, if you look at a water bill now, almost half the bill is this stormwater charge. So it would be a significant savings to gardens if they didn't have to pay a stormwater charge. And the stormwater charge is prorated on how large the lot is. So some large gardens can have a pretty significant stormwater charge. So NGT, the group of the Garden Advisory Committee, which is a committee of the board of NGT, but also a committee that works with garden leaders at NGT Gardens, came together to put together an advocacy campaign to provide testimony from garden leaders to the water department board when they were thinking about accepting this change. So there was a series of 3 public hearings, I guess in fall 2016. Thank you for reminding me, Joe, what the exact timeline was, that we provided testimony. And we had maybe representatives from probably 15 to 20 gardens come out across the 3 meetings to provide testimony. And it was impactful testimony. It was testimony about the role these gardens serve in their communities, how onerous like small charges like this can be over the course of a season, because you think about a garden, mainly their income comes from the member dues from plot holders, and we don't charge heavy dues. Like, we're talking between $10 and $30 a year for raised bed plots in these gardens. So if you have a stormwater charge, it's maybe $10 to $40 a month. that's quickly going to eat into a percentage of your dues as a garden. So it made sense to us to petition the water board to exempt us from these fees. And at the end of it, the water board agreed, and they did. So gardens in the city can now apply to the water department to get a rolling exemption in a period of, I think, 3 to 4 years, that you can continue to have no stormwater charges on your garden if a percentage of the land of the garden is impervious, or no, pervious. If a percentage of the land in the garden is pervious. So you can't have more than 15% impervious surface in the garden. So that's things like concrete or patios that would cause this stormwater runoff rather than cause the stormwater capture, which is really what you're trying to do with the stormwater management.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to, I guess, quickly move from that into kind of walking us through a year in Bouvier, and what traditions kind of characterize work and recreation in this space since it's been rebuilt.
Right. So Bouvier, like a lot of South Philly, is small and tight. Like there's not a lot of room. It's on 3 lots, but I think it's under 2,000 square feet, the whole garden. So it's a pretty small garden, and we have 21 plots. So some are family kind of owned, so maybe 24 to 25 gardeners in a year, plus a nice patio now. But there's not a lot of common space that we have to maintain. Like there's the shade bed and there's some grass in the pathways, but beyond that, there's not a lot of areas that cause us too much trouble as far as maintenance is concerned. So really work days, we schedule a work day a month, but at the work days themselves, there's not a lot of common projects to work on. So it's a garden that with a group of gardeners takes care of itself pretty quickly. So that we've had sometimes that we don't see as many gardeners as we want to kind of get together and know each other that much, just because it's not a big requirement to have to come together and do a lot of work together. So we've tried to do different social events through the years, potlucks and stuff, and we have gardeners come to those. Community Gardens Day before the pandemic was a big highlight of the year. We'd have the garden open for Community Gardens Day, the 3rd Saturday in June. For a number of years, we gave tours to neighbors that would come and visit the garden. And that was a day for us to sort of get the garden together and sort of show it off to the neighborhood. Since then, we've also had, there's a gardener in the garden named Andrew Harris, and he's a musician, and he's involved with a festival. I think it's called Make Music Philly. Maybe it happens again in near the end of June. And the last couple of years, he's done concerts in the garden. So it's been he'll play, and then he'll get a few other people to kind of put together a little lineup. And I think that's happened 3 times now over the last couple of years. Not the pandemic year, but it did happen again this year. So that's been kind of the highlight of the social calendar, if you will, in Bouvier Garden. And then beyond that, I don't think it's a highly social garden. I think it's a garden that people grow their plants on. I think during the pandemic year, especially, people used it as an outdoor recreation space. So that neighbors would come and sit in the garden and have a time to socially distance and converse with friends. So they would bring outside friends into the garden. We had a time that we would go through a little bit of a reservation system where people could reserve a night in the garden because we didn't have too many people congregating in such a small space during the pandemic. So that was a nice thing for people in South Philly, for the gardeners and for their friends to have last year. And then this year with the pandemic guidelines, we didn't have to do as much sort of with that, reserving nights and stuff. But we've been pretty careful around too many people in the garden because it's such a small space right now.
Okay, that was also really helpful to learn about. I did not know about the music festival. So I wanted to, I guess, quickly ask now if you have any favorite stories or anecdotes from your time with the garden that you want to share.
Favorite stories. I mean, we love the early season cleanup days, and you sort of get your plots together and plan it out for the first time. The first time I found snakes in the garden was fun. Yeah, like little brown snakes were under the compost pile. And like you wouldn't think in the concrete jungle in South Philly you'd find snakes, but we found snakes. And I'm friends with this local nature enthusiast, Bernard Brown. He writes a column in Grid Magazine, and he does like a city nature podcast. And he's also involved with the City Nature Challenge, which is like an iNaturalist citizen science challenge. But he's a big like reptile, snake, herpetologist kind of guy. And I was telling him about these snakes down in the garden, and he said he didn't know that there were, like, he knows where snakes are everywhere in Philadelphia, but he didn't know that there were actually snakes like in that part of South Philly in Point Breeze, 18th and Wharton. So he like actually came down and like, you know, traveled around the lots down there and like found a bunch of these snakes, and it was kind of cool for him to be able to like say like, oh yeah, this is kind of neat that these snakes are even down here. It just shows the resilience of nature and getting around in that way. So that's a, you know, an interesting thing that I like. I love this little shade garden that we planted up a couple of years ago next to the patio. I'm probably more of like an ornamental perennial gardener than a vegetable gardener. Like I grow vegetables, but it's more my passion to do perennials and ornamentals. So it was fun to plant that, and it's really grown in well. So I think it's, you know, becoming a great space. And I just think back on like how fortunate we were to be involved with PHS and NGT at that time, that we had to rebuild everything, because I just don't think we could have done it without that. You know.
Just quick question, I guess for me. So is your background on Zoom showing some of the shade garden?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
you want to? Could you? I honestly have to confess, I really don't know that much about ornamental plants. So do you want to quickly just like, you know, identify any of those that you see in it?
Sure. Yeah. So it's like a little little patch on the side, probably 6 by 10, that we planted with a sweet bay magnolia that we got out of the Tree Philly yard tree program. So that was cool. It's all in the shade. So we have mixed heuchera. There's some heuchera autumn bride in there. We have a hydrangea that blooms closest to the street. We have an itea plant that blooms white in the spring. We have ferns that kind of lay behind the signs. And then in spring, we have a little iris pistata, columbine, aquilegia that bloom in there, and then a white blooming tiarella that blooms throughout in the spring. So I planted it that like it tries to have something blooming at every time of the year. So it's pretty much worked. It's been a pretty successful planting, but it's been fun to work on.
Yeah, I have to say I'm aspiring to set up a similar garden myself, and I really like aquilegia and ferns too. So like, you know, props. I do recognize the aquilegia now in the picture, I think, on the left. But anyway, okay, we're reaching, I think, the end of the time I had allotted for the interview. So I wanted to, I guess, close out with a reflective question, which would be, what are your future plans, you know, for the garden going forward, now that you have kind of established, you know, some stability with your gardener base? I
guess I didn't even like get into this part of it, but like we actually do have 3 vacant lots to the north side of the garden still, and they are going to have a house put on them in the next probably 18 months. So we're going to go through a little bit of a construction process again on that part of the garden in the next 18 months. We always knew this was going to happen. So anything that we put in like, you know, permanent way, we put in on the other side of the garden. So it's really just like a fence there and just like the pathway. So it shouldn't be like major impacts on any of the stuff we've done over the last few years. But it will be something that happens in the future that will affect, you know, the landscape of the garden. So we're hoping, and we own the lot line, so it's not like they can do a whole lot. Like it's not going to have to involve moving things like water lines or sheds or any of that. But that's probably ahead for the next 18 months of the garden, is that construction. We're hopeful that the large wrought iron fence that's currently on that side of the garden can be moved to the back of the garden, so that we can have a big wrought iron fence in the back and in the front. And then on both sides will go flush into the house wall. And at that point in time, like once that house is built there, then the garden will be, you know, fully fully landscaped. It will have its perimeter set, and it will be like able to not have a temporary side on that north part as it does right now. But it's not a significant issue in the garden, and we don't expect it to be a significant issue going forward. But it will be something that's like, you know, gardeners and as a garden group will have to like go through that process with them. You know, I've spoken to those developers too, and they again like don't want it to be a huge problem. They always say that, and we're hopeful that it's not. But that's like in the immediate near term for the garden. And then I think like in the sort of not as like time based, it would be great to interact with the community and bring neighbors into the space more than we currently do. So that could look like, you know, more events at the garden. That could look like more open hours. That could look like block parties that we'd arrange. And I think that would be like building that capacity in the garden group to arrange and plan and kind of coordinate activities like that is the piece that we haven't put together yet, just because, you know, we've been so hard just trying to like keep the space together in the last 5 years. And that, you know, that's not always the skill set that I have. I'm more of the person that grows the plants and make sure everything's sort of like is kept together, and not as much of the social community planning kind of aspect that a good garden could like have both. It would have the, you know, the plant stuff, and it would also have like an ability to interact with the neighborhood and have people like come in and enjoy the space and have open hours and programming and things like that. But I think that would be the next step for the garden, is designing programming there. They would keep the gates open a little more and bring a few more people into the space that we've created.
Wow, that's also really cool. I almost wish that we had Amanda here as well to hear her thoughts on that. But and also her perspective on everything. But yeah, maybe I'll have to interview her at some point if she's willing.
Yeah, I think she would be willing, Joe. If you want it, you can certainly talk to them. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your time. It's been a really great interview with you. If you're all right with it, I'd like to take a screenshot of you to compile with this interview.
Sure.
Yeah. Give me a second. Let me just check to make sure it's saved, but I believe that should be it. Yeah, we got it. Thank you. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm really glad that you chose this as your background for it, because this is I also think going to be a great artifact. And yeah, you can feel free to send any pictures of the garden as well. You know, I think
I have pictures. I have like drawings from the redesign. I have like the plans of the development and how it sort of cuts the lot lines of the garden. I have all that stuff. So.
Yeah, ideally we'll, you know, be able, like, we can help you, you know, host those online. We're looking at, you know, using Omeka, as I think I might have told you.
Right.
But yeah, and so that might even be just something you could potentially upload once we have that aspect of the whole, you know, user uploading figured out. But okay, I'm going to stop recording now. So